They say you only feel watched when you choose to feel watched. But the night I turned around and saw him smiling at nothing, I learned that some eyes never blink. Story 1. The Man at the Bus Stop expanded. I was 19 and broke and stubborn, walking home from a late shift that ended past midnight. The kind of hour when the streetlights flicker and the air gets mean. The bus stop sat beneath a sagging billboard for a fast food chain, its lights busted, its bench rusting, its glass tagged with looping marker scrawls that looked like tangled veins. I saw him there on a Tuesday night first, a tall shape on the bench with his hands folded like someone in a quiet church, head tilted as if listening for something distant. He did not check a phone. He did not smoke or fidget or shiver. He just held himself still. Stillness at that hour felt like a decision, not an accident. I walked past with my keys in my fist, a little theater I always did, telling myself it was smart, telling myself actors win the scene where they look confident. Behind me, metal creaked as the bench shifted, then rubber soles touched concrete, then footsteps found a rhythm that softened when I slowed and quickened when I hurried. The block to my apartment was long and narrow, a tunnel of brick warehouses and locked roll-up doors. The kind of block where sound carries in strange ways and distances lie. I crossed the street because my mother once said crossing breaks a pattern. A tiny trick to shake a tail, and the moment my shoes hit the opposite curb, I heard his follow. No voice, no hello, no lame excuse like, hey, do you know the time? Just the math of our strides solving for distance, decreasing in small, exact fractions. Halfway down the block, I glanced at the black mirror of a storefront and found his reflection mic'd by the glass. A silhouette with shoulders a little too square and head a little too curious. I told myself people share sidewalks. I told myself this is a city, not a haunted maze. I told myself any story can be cut at the first commercial break. The single working street lamp on my corner gave a pale cone of light like a cheap stage. And when I stepped into it, I felt seen by God and by something less kind. In that white-orange wash, I saw him clearly for the first time. Pale coat that looked like it used to be a nice color, but lost the argument, scuffed shoes, face calm like a clerk. Not angry, not excited, not drunk, just present, tuned to me. As if he had been paid to witness and was taking the job seriously. I reached my building and did the clumsy key dance every renter knows. Wrong key, wrong angle, right angle, unlocking while acting like I had a conversation in my ear. At the end of the block, he stopped in the shadow between two busted lamps, hands still folded, head tilted, studying, and I realized he had not been chasing me. He had been hurting me. The door gave. I slipped inside. I listened for the outside hinges and heard nothing but the city humming to itself like a refrigerator that never rests. I slept with my sneakers by the bed that night, a small superstition that felt like armor, and I woke twice convinced someone was standing behind the thin curtain, pretending to be moonlight. Wednesday night, I saw him again at the bus stop. Same posture like a paused video, same patient head tilt, same silence that did not feel shy, just strategic. I considered waiting inside the diner across the street. I considered calling a friend. I considered paying for the bus and riding past my stop like a decoy, but pride is cheap and stubborn. I walked the same route, and he followed the same distance. Like we were both repeating lines from a script written by someone who hated improvisation. This time I turned before the corner and looked right at him, which is a thing I had been afraid to do. And I locked eyes with a man who smiled with only the edges of his mouth. The smile communicated nothing I understood. No friendliness, no apology, no hey sorry. It was the polite smile you give before closing a door, or before opening one very slowly. Do you need something? I asked, loud enough to bounce off brick, ready to hold my ground, and he lifted his chin like he was appreciating a public sculpture that moved of its own accord. He did not answer. He did not approach. He just mirrored my stance a millimeter off, like a mime who edits for effect. Then he let me go with a tiny nod that felt like a permission slip. I made it inside and called the non-emergency police line, and the operator said the words they have to say. Stay aware. Travel with someone if you can. Avoid that route if possible. Avoid that route if possible. In a neighborhood where I could afford exactly one route, where rent dictated geography and my feet were my only luxury vehicle. Thursday, I left the diner at 10:30 instead of midnight, a test. And the bus stop was empty, which should have felt like relief, but the absence of a pattern is also a pattern. Halfway home, I heard footsteps again, not heavy, not hurried, not even close, just there, persistent, like a drip in a quiet room that you can pretend away until you cannot. I cut down a side street that smelled like wet cardboard and detergent, the laundromat humming blue light from its sleepless windows, and I watched glass reflections for shapes not my own. He did not show in the glass. He did not cross at the corner. He did not materialize under the next lamp, and I told myself I had won something small and important. At my door, I saw the folded paper tucked beneath the mat, a shape too neat to be junk, and I understood patterns can change their clothes when they want to. The note was white printer paper with a clean fold and a short message printed in a friendly font. You drop your shoulders when you are almost home. It must be heavy to be brave. No signature, no threat, no demand, just a compliment that felt like somebody licking the rim of my glass and setting it back down exactly where it had been. I stared at the letters until they started to look like a hallway of tiny doors. Then I tore the page into pieces and flushed it, watching the black ink smear like mascara. Friday, the manager let me clock out early because the dinner rush died. And I asked coworker Lena to walk with me. And we laughed too loud and made plans we would never keep. The bus stop was crowded with real people being real. Teens with backpacks hitting each other with punchlines. A man nodding off with fries on his lap. A woman arguing softly with herself. He was not there, and Lena said, "See, sometimes fear is a story we tell to stay awake." And I said, "Sure." And the word "sure" tasted like tinfoil. At my building, she hugged me and said, "Text me," and I promised. And when the door closed behind me, the air in the lobby felt like a held breath. On the stairs, third floor landing, the light had burned out again. And I told the darkness a joke in my head, acting casual for an audience of none, pretending noise was armor. At my door, the hall was quiet enough to hear my pulse in my ears, and as I slid the key in, heard a tiny sound from behind me, not a footstep, a shoe settling after a long day. I turned slowly because sudden movements make prey, and there he was at the far end of the hall. Hands folded, head tilted, like the hallway itself had carried him up and delivered him. "This is my floor," I said, trying to sound like a neighbor with boundaries. And he mirrored the phrase back at me without speaking, his mouth shaping the syllables like a rehearsal. Something about being seen in light makes a person more real, and something about being seen in that much quiet made him too real, like a photograph printed too sharply. I stepped into my apartment and held the door, buying seconds, calculating, and asked, "Can I help you with anything?" which was just another way to say, "Please choose to leave." He nodded as if I had offered a useful service menu. Then he moved toward me with a pace that was not aggressive. It's not timid, just the steady pace of someone who has decided. I shut the door before he reached me, locked the 3 locks I had laughed at when I moved in, and his knuckles tapped the wood softly, politely, twice a knock you would open for in daytime. I backed away because every tutorial on staying safe says put distance between you and the point of failure, and then the tapping stopped and I heard nothing. A nothing that is not silence, a nothing like a crowded room holding its breath, nothing that makes refrigerators and pipes and phones reconsider their careers in background noise. I called Lena and whispered, and she said, "I am outside still. Do you want me to come back up?" And I said no, because terror spins pride into policy. I called the police, and the dispatcher used the calm voice I envied, and she said, "Do not open the door. Stay in a room with a second exit if possible. Keep me on the line." 5 minutes is an hour when your whole body is listening, and I heard the stairs creak to floors below, then 1 floor below, then nothing again, and distant lobby voices that sounded official. The officers checked the hall and the stairwells and the roof, and they made notes with pens that clicked. And they asked me to describe him like I was painting with numbers. I described the stillness first, then the tilt of his head, then the polite almost smile. That felt like a customer service survey without a company behind it. They nodded. They left a card. They said, "We will increase patrol in the area, and please vary your route and schedule," as if I had been randomizing like a spy this whole time. I called my mother and did not tell her the real version. I gave her the edited one I could live with, the one where it was a misunderstanding engineered by shadows and coincidence. Saturday, I slept late and dreamed of hallways that looped, hallways that brought me back to the same door where a folded note rested like a moth. In the afternoon, I walked to the laundromat because clothes still get dirty in a thriller. And I sat on the plastic chair that eats posture and watched the drum of the washer hypnotize socks. Through the window, I saw him across the street pretending to be interested in a real estate flyer on a locked office door. And his stillness pressed against the glass like a hand. I decided to act, not brave, just tired, and I called a friend who owns a big dog that believes in law and order. And she said yes, without asking questions I could not answer. We walked the block together at dusk, me and my friend and the dog that made brave noises deep in his chest, and we saw the bus stop, empty, in the corner. Empty, and the doorway, not empty. He stood half inside the shadow of a recessed entrance, watching us the way you watch a train you intend to board eventually. As if timing is everything and patience is a skill. My friend said, "Can I help you?" in a tone that meant try me, and the dog stepped forward with democratic interest. And the man touched his chest lightly, like he was pledging to a flag. He said very softly, like the end of a bedtime story, "I like the way she walks." And the dog barked a syllable that put teeth around the sentence and broke it in half. We called again. The officers came again. They did the checks and the notes and the warnings again. And they told us he had not committed a chargeable crime by standing and looking. Stalking is a word that takes paperwork to define. And terror is a feeling that fills out its own forms, swiftly, thoroughly, without your consent. I slept that night with the dog on my floor, a generous loan. And in the early morning hours, the dog raised his head and listened to something my human ears could not hear. His eyes fixed on the bottom of my door where the light of the hallway made a thin halo, and I understood that sometimes the smallest sliver of brightness invites the worst kind of attention. A shadow paused there, like a cloud crossing a window, and the dog growled with a bass note that said he had read the terms and did not agree, and the shadow moved away. Sunday morning, my landlord replaced the hallway bulbs and added a camera that blinked a red dot like a heartbeat, and for a few hours I believed in blinking red lights. That night, another note waited under my mat. Same printer paper, same friendly font. "You do not drop your shoulders when the dog is with you. I wonder how heavy he will be next week." I packed a bag while my hands became someone else's hands, clumsy, automatic. More interested in the ritual than the content, and I called my aunt to neighborhoods over who keeps a spare key for emergencies. She answered on the second ring and said, "Emergency means come here, not maybe later." And I said okay, and felt 19 and 8 and 5 all at once. We left together, me and the dog, and my friend walked us to a rideshare. The driver made small talk about football, while I watched the side mirrors like they were crystal balls. At my aunt's building, the security camera showed our faces in grain, and for the first time in days, I loved a distorted version of myself, a face the camera understood as a person worth recording. I slept on a couch that smelled like clean detergent and cinnamon tea, and the city finally made refrigerator sounds again. Respectable, domestic, forgiving. Monday morning, the diner called to say the manager had seen a man waiting outside at opening. Pale coat, quiet smile, patient posture, and he had asked a polite question about staff schedules. The manager said he told the truth loudly, which is a skill. He said our schedules change, and our staff do not discuss routines with customers. And the man nodded like a student who enjoys a lecture. I did not go back Monday. I did not go back Tuesday. And on Wednesday, Lena texted a photo taken from behind the counter. It was the bus stop, and it was empty. He never came in again. Not to the diner, not to my building, not to my aunt's street. And sometimes monsters leave because they have eaten enough of your time to feel full. I moved apartments that month with help from people who lift more than fear. And I learned to love the way a dog's paws sound on a new hallway, like punctuation that promises an ending. Years later, when the air turns that same mean temperature, I still cross the street not to escape him, but to honor the version of me that kept walking. Keys in fist, heartbeat loud and useful. I tell myself patterns can be defeated by attention, and by community, and by inconvenient barking, and I keep walking, and the night keeps watching, and for now, that is enough. Story 2, the neighbor with the camera. When I first moved into the apartment, I thought the man across the hall was just quiet. The kind of tenant who preferred shadows over introductions, the kind who never knocked and never waved. He wore the same gray hoodie most days, the kind that hid expression and frame in his eyes when they met mine, were sharp in a way that felt more like measurement than curiosity. I told myself I was imagining it, that city neighbors are supposed to be strange, that I could live anywhere so long as the rent was cheap and the locks worked. The first note came 3 weeks after I moved in. A white envelope slipped neatly under my door, typed in blocky font. No handwriting, no signature, just words. It read, "You looked beautiful walking home today." And though the phrase was harmless, it clawed at me because I had not seen him outside. I had not seen anyone outside. I crumpled it, tossed it in the trash, and told myself someone was bored. Someone was playing a dumb prank. Someone had me confused with another tenant. But the second note described the blue dress I wore on Thursday, the one with the loose strap that slid too often, the one I had not worn in months before that day. The third note mentioned the scar on my left shoulder, a thin line from a childhood fall. Something invisible under most clothes, something no stranger could casually notice. My stomach turned when I read it because the only way he could know was if his eyes had lingered too long. If his gaze had been deliberate, not accidental. I bought heavier curtains the next morning, and when I installed them, I caught a glimpse of him through the crack of his door, standing there, watching silently. His apartment was dark behind him, no furniture I could see, no clutter, just emptiness, and his face pale, illuminated by the hall light, expressionless. That night I noticed a small red blink across the hall. Barely visible in the shadows, a camera lens disguised against the doorframe, pointed at my doorway. I felt my throat tighten, because this was not a prank. This was surveillance, patient and steady, waiting for me to forget it existed. I knocked on the landlord's door, demanded answers, and the landlord shrugged, said the neighbor was quiet, paid rent on time, never caused trouble, harmless. Harmless, he repeated, as though the word itself could erase the blinking light I had seen. As though harmless could outweigh the heavy eyes I felt across the hall. That night, I triple-locked my door, dragged a chair against it, and still lay awake, listening to every creak of the building, every shift of the wood, every phantom sound. At 3 a.m., I heard it, the delicate scrape of metal against metal, a soft testing of the lock, as though someone were learning how the tumblers sang. I pressed my ear to the door and heard breathing, shallow and patient, like someone enjoying the sound of waiting. I held my phone in my shaking hands, ready to call, but the scratching stopped. The breathing faded, and silence returned, thick and cruel. The next morning, I checked the hallway and found a tiny scratch near the lock. Mark so faint, it could be ignored, but not by me, never by me. Carried pepper spray in my pocket everywhere, even inside. Because the walls did not feel like protection anymore. They felt like paper, thin and flammable. A week later, I woke to a different sound, a rhythmic noise that blended with my dreams until it snapped me awake, heart pounding. It was breathing again, but louder, closer, not muffled by wood, and when I turned toward my window, my stomach dropped. He was outside on the fire escape, his face pressed against the glass, his breath fogging it into pale clouds, his hands resting lightly on the frame as if testing it. I screamed, and the scream startled him, but not enough, not like I hoped, because instead of running, he tilted his head, as though curious about my reaction. I grabbed my phone, raised it, and when I turned back, he was gone. Vanished into the night like smoke, leaving only the ghost of his breath as evidence. The police came, took my statement, asked if I knew him, if he had threatened me, if he had made demands, and when I said no, they frowned. Without threats, without demands, it was hard, they said, their voices polite but tired, hard to prove malice. Hard to protect me from someone who knew how to hover without touching. I slept with the lights on, with a chair jammed against the window, with my phone in my hand, with dreams broken into shards that never let me rest. 2 days later, another note arrived. Tucked under my mat, neat typed. Impossible to ignore, reading, "You look different when you cry." My hands shook so badly, I nearly tore it before I even opened it fully, and I thought of his face at the glass, tilted, studying, memorizing. I called my parents, begged them to let me stay, but they lived far, and the thought of him following me there, knowing more poisoned that option. I looked for other apartments, but moving cost us money I did not have. And every tour made me feel like I was dragging him along, like his shadow was already stepping inside with me. One night, the hallway lights went out again. Burned bulbs the landlord never fixed. And I stepped outside to take out trash, the bag heavy and stinking. In the dark silence, I felt him there before I saw him, a shift of air, the faint sound of fabric, and when I turned, his silhouette filled the end of the hall. I dropped the bag, heart hammering, whispered, "Leave me alone," my voice breaking, and he did not move. He only lifted his phone. The tiny red light blinked, and I realized he was recording me, capturing my fear, storing it like a prize. I ran back inside, locked the door, called the police again, and they came again. And once more they said there was little they could do. The next morning, I started packing, shoving clothes into bags, breaking dishes in my rush, leaving behind furniture I had saved for, abandoning normalcy. I broke my lease, paid fees with money I did not have, but I left. I left because the air in that hallway had become poison. When I moved into a new apartment across town, I promised myself he was gone, that I had outrun him, that shadows stay behind when you shut the door. But sometimes, late at night, when I feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, I remember his notes, his camera, his breath on the glass, and I wonder. I wonder if he found another neighbor, another door, another scar to notice. Or if he still has a file somewhere with my name, waiting for the day he returns. Story 3. The Grocery Store Shadow. I was tired, carrying grocery bags heavy with cans and milk, the kind of weight that makes your arms tremble and your balance clumsy. And that was when I saw him first. He stood by the sliding glass doors, not browsing, not waiting. Just standing still, eyes fixed on me, his body locked as though the air itself had asked him to hold a pose. I told myself, people stare, people daydream, people forget how obvious they look when lost in thought. But when I stepped inside, he stepped too, his pace perfectly matched. Every aisle I turned into, he appeared a moment later, pretending to glance at boxers, at jars, at nothing. But his head always tilted my way, like a compass drawn to one point. I tested him by looping back through frozen foods, stopping at random shelves, pretending to compare labels I had no intention of buying, and each time, there he was. No cart, no basket, no items in his hands, just empty palms and steady shoes, moving at my rhythm, stopping when I stopped, a shadow too deliberate to be mistaken. By the time I checked out, my chest was tight, my throat dry, and my eyes burned from trying not to look behind me, but I could feel him, patient, waiting. The cashier smiled politely, unaware of the storm building in my head, her small talk like static while my ears strained for the sound of his shoes on tile. When the door slid open, night greeted me with silence, the parking lot wide, and almost empty yellow lamps buzzing like tired insects, and that was when fear sank claws in. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, steps behind me, his stride calm, his expression unreadable, as though following me home was the most natural decision in the world. I hurried toward my car, fumbling for the keys, bags biting into my fingers, the sound of his footsteps crunching on gravel, a cruel metronome that would not slow. I dropped a bag, cans rolling across asphalt, and for a moment I froze, debating whether to pick them up or abandon them. But the sound of his shoes grew closer. I lunged into my car, slammed the door shut, locked it with shaking hands, and started the engine, my heart racing faster than the turning ignition. When I looked up, he was standing directly in front of my car. Too close, framed by the headlights, his face pale and eyes glinting with something cold. He did not move when I honked, did not flinch when I shouted. He only tilted his head, that same slow, deliberate angle that spoke more than words ever could. The faintest smile curved at his lips, not joy, not friendliness, just the acknowledgement of a game that had rules I did not understand. Finally, he stepped aside, dragging his fingertips across my window as I sped past, the sound like nails on glass, faint but unforgettable. I drove home with white knuckles, glancing at mirrors every block, half expecting headlights to appear behind me, but the road stayed empty, eerily empty. At my building, I sat in the car for minutes, staring at the lobby doors, too afraid to cross the short distance, convinced he would step from the shadows if I dared. When I finally ran inside, bolted the door, and pressed my back against it, I told myself it was over, that he had chosen a moment to scare me, and that was all. But 2 nights later, leaving work, I saw him again, Across the street from the entrance, standing still beneath a lamp, his gaze fixed like glass. I tried to pretend I did not notice, walked fast, kept my phone against my ear, though the call screen was blank. But every reflection I passed told the same truth. His figure followed, never hurried, never distant, just there, a shadow I could not shake. Patient in a way that drained the word coincidence of all meaning. I reported him, filed the words like a report card of fear, described his posture, his eyes, his silence, but without threats. Without proof, the police could only nod and promise patrols. At work, I started leaving with friends, their voices loud, their laughter filling the streets. But every now and then, at the edge of the crowd, I saw him. Always far enough to be deniable. Always still enough to question myself, but never gone, never truly gone. The worst night came weeks later, when I parked in the underground garage of my building, a place too quiet, too echoing, where even a drip of water felt like footsteps. As I stepped out of my car, bags in hand, I heard the shuffle of shoes, slow, unhurried, coming from the far corner where shadows swallowed the walls. I froze, called out a nervous hello, my voice cracking and from the dark. He emerged, pale face, faint smile, empty hands. He took one step, then another, his eyes fixed on me, and I dropped everything, sprinting for the elevator, hitting the button again and again with shaking fingers. The doors slid shut as his footsteps reached the concrete nearby, and for a moment, I swear I saw his hand extend, pressing against the steel just as it closed. I ran into my apartment, locked everything, and sat with my back to the door, crying silently. Because I knew he would be back, because shadows do not give up. For days I checked every window, every mirror, half expecting to see him. And sometimes, I swear I did, faintly, just at the edge of vision, watching. Eventually I moved, left behind the city, the job, the friends, because the weight of his silence had carved too deep into me. But even now, in crowded streets of another town, in different stores with brighter lights, I sometimes feel it again, the weight of unseen eyes, the rhythm of steps behind me. And when I glance back and the street is empty, I remind myself that he does not need to be visible to exist. That once a shadow learns your name, it never really forgets.